Right. Hello again, everyone. Ready to get started on our webinar for mobile payments. Again, as advertised in the abstract, I think we're going to spend some time talking about how the mobile payment landscape has changed in the last 2 years and what has that done to mobile app development, and how these apps that are processing payment transactions need to be secured, right? Before we get started, let's do some brief introductions. I'll go first because I'm uber excited. So, for those of you who have not seen the news this morning, Liberty Strategic Capital, which is the company, the PE firm that manages Steve Mnuchin's fund, invested 525 million in Zimperium, and they acquired a majority stake. So we're super pumped. As you all know, this really helps us embrace our mission to protect every mobile device on the planet. So super psyched. My name is Krishna Vaishnabatla. I'm the VP of Product Strategy, and I'm joined by two other colleagues. Andrew Snyder, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Snyder. I'm based in Northern California, and I lead the MAPS global team. I'm excited to talk with you today about what we offer in the payment space.
Thanks, Andrew. And Tim Hartog, is our resident specialist. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm here actually at FS ISAC in Orlando, and I'm looking forward to the webinar.
Excellent, excellent. So let's do a quick poll question to see who we're chatting with and who the audience is. Allison, if you can put up the poll question.
Yeah, it's up.
Thank you. Folks, we'll just wait for just to see what the results of the poll question are. All right.
Like we should have some music playing or like Jeopardy, something like that.
Well, we must have asked a complicated question.
That was going in my head the whole time.
All right. So today's agenda, folks, again, thank you for taking the time, right? Today, what we want to do is we want to talk about how mobile payments have evolved over the last 2 years, right? Obviously, with the pandemic, everyone's embraced a low-touch economy. It's changed how we consume any physical digital goods overall, how we pay through our phones, and so on. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to talk about, well, what has done to mobile threats, right? How has the threat landscape changed because of our behaviors have changed? Application security, right? What does this mean for app developers who are developing apps, right? What do they need to think about? What do they need to be aware of? And we'll close this out with some best practices, right? If you today are building mobile apps that are interacting with payment data, what are some things you need to keep in mind, right? What are some pitfalls so that you keep everybody's payment information safe? But before we get started, again, just a little bit of housekeeping. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to post them. If we know the answer, we will provide the answers as soon as possible. If there's something that we need to do a little bit of research on, we promise we will get back to you. So with that, let me turn it over. And Tim, 2 years of the pandemic, I think it's completely changed how I pay for anything. Seems like I don't even pull out my plastic credit card anymore. What's going on?
Yeah, well, that's actually a nice development. Whereas we saw that mobile payment was getting more and more traction in the different facets or use cases we see. I mean, you can use your smartphone now to make payments in stores. We use it for our banking. We use it for trading coins. We use it online to make purchases. And some aspects of these payment use cases have been adapted already quite a lot, but we have seen for a fact that the pandemic has increased that or accelerated that development. So especially the adoption of making mobile payments QR code based or tokenization based, that has definitely taken a very large uptake in the past 2 years as people moved away essentially from their cards using their smartphone to make payments. So this has been one of the drivers, not the only one. The different use cases we just went through, we have seen that most of them are oriented at consumers. So the way we make payments, transitioning away from cash to cards to essentially our smartphones now. But there has been another technology in the recent past which has gained a lot of momentum in the past few years, and that's continuing to building up. And that's essentially using your smartphone as a payment acceptance device. So these are merchants using their smartphone essentially in order to accept payments instead of having to use the physical, expensive legacy point of sales terminals. This transition is still taking place. And while there was a lack of suitable industries and standardization until this point, we see that this will change in the upcoming year with the publication or the expected publication of PCI MPOC. And MPOC stands for Mobile Payment on COTS. And essentially, this new standard will effectively cause another transformation in the payment domain, in the payment space, especially for merchants, where they really can use their own means, smartphones, to accept payments.
Yeah, you know what, Tim, the interesting thing, right? And I travel to India every year, and every time I go east, the adoption of QR codes is incredible, right? Every street vendor now in India, when I go home, has a QR code, right? And everybody uses Google Pay. And if you go to some of the smaller grocery stores, right, they clearly can't afford $1,000 cash register, right? And they just love either using their own phone or just a QR code. It's incredible how quickly they've embraced these technologies.
Yeah, I think India with UPI, so the Universal Payment Interface, but also China and the other Asian countries have really been a step ahead compared to Europe and the US with adoption of QR code-based payments and also mobile payments.
Sure.
The challenges here, and that's also moving to the next point. While we see that the adoption of these payment means is taking a lot of momentum and increasing the actual numbers, we're essentially using generic consumer devices now to handle all our financial transactions. And that does not go without risk. So we have moved away from devices which are really built for a specific purpose, making payments, and all the security around it has also been oriented towards that single goal or purpose. We're now using our own smartphones, where there is a tremendous variety of with different footprints in terms of security for making these payments. And this is actually quite a paradigm shift because we're moving away from hardware devices to software apps, and we're moving away from really designed and secured payment devices to just a mobile app on our everyday consumer smartphone. And this brings new challenges, I think, from a security perspective to the payment ecosystem. But it also brings the need to secure these solutions, and we also see that this is a necessity. There is no doubt that these consumer devices do not reach the same level of security as these traditional hardware-based devices if they are not secured properly, because they're simply not designed to make payments. My own smartphone, I'm using a Pixel phone. That might be a relatively new smartphone, but there's a plethora of consumers which use a very wide variety of devices where you have no clue how secure these devices are, what is actually running on there. And this is also what we see back when we look at the actual threats towards these devices. There's a continuous flow of published vulnerabilities, of malware, of exploits, and they only demonstrate this. These devices are also subject to attackers, which essentially have different objectives. But typically in the payment space, fraud is the main driver for attacking these solutions. This slide only shows a few examples. We'll not go into any of these, but there are many more, and there are simply too many examples to discuss. But the main point is that we see three levels of threats or attacker surface, essentially. So on one side, we have the device itself, the operating system, the platform underneath, so the hardware. Could be a trust execution environment or other components in there. Where we see compromise, I think the Samsung hack recently, where they dumped almost 200 gigabytes of data, including all the secure bootloaders, the TE code, the trusted applications. That's a massive compromise of one of the leading vendors in this space, and that only shows how vulnerable we actually are with these devices. The second layer is essentially the App Store itself. So one of the functions which you see Apple and Google have is to essentially filter the different applications which we can use as consumers. There are, of course, many more app stores around, but I think it's fair to say that the legitimate Google and iOS app stores are probably the much larger ones. But their effectiveness in terms of filtering malicious applications only goes so far. So we do still see a lot of malicious applications which are also available in the legitimate app stores, and they're essentially tricking and persuading users to install these apps with all the consequences which go with it. And then last but not least, you have the actual attacks on legitimate apps. So your own banking application or your wallet or other applications which are essentially compromised by vulnerabilities in the OS and attackers exploiting these, or other malware or malicious applications which are taking benefit of a lack of security in the payment applications themselves. So we do see that mobile security is really a full ecosystem challenge at this moment.
Yeah, I kind of look at this as, it's the BYOD problem for payments, right? Now you have to worry about the health of the device that you run on if you're a mobile payment app. So makes sense, Tim. Keep going.
Yeah, I think this is also enforced in our own global threat report, which we published last month. So Simperium has created or published a global threat report, which goes into the different aspects in terms of mobile security we see with regard to malware, phishing, exploits, all sorts of nasty things on our smartphones. But one of the aspects in there is that also that we have seen in 2021 itself a tremendous increase in the amount of 0 days, and so the actual vulnerabilities and the exploits developed to actually abuse these vulnerabilities. We have seen a tremendous numbers of malware samples being published on a daily basis, almost 5,000, which is a lot. That's over 1.5 million a year. And we have seen, and I don't think we are the only one here, is that based on our own scan of financial applications, we still see that many of these financial applications, think of your banking application, your QR code wallet, your stock trading application, is that many, if not most of these applications, 81% in our research, still contains several vulnerabilities which leak data or allow for compromise essentially by malicious actors. So this is, it does demonstrate that there's still a strong need to improve our security posture in this field.
Yeah, and Tim, all the research that we consume as well, right? The payment information is very lucrative, right? If you're a malicious actor, you can monetize payment information quite well, because if you see, one of the biggest issues that most financial services companies have is synthetic identities. And a lot of this is, if you lose your PII or payment data, it's sold to malicious actors that just turn it around, build synthetic identities, and again, go after your firm, right? So the monetary model behind a lot of this data is tremendous. People make a lot of money selling this in the black market.
Yeah, I think this is obvious in the payment space. We have account takeovers of your banking application with all the funds which go with it. If you're trading, I don't want other people to control what stocks I buy or sell. That's not a nice thing to be in that position. And the same thing with your wallets. The wallets themselves are an asset, but also the underlying data, which essentially makes your wallet inside the app running on your phone, can be abused to make authentic payments essentially on your behalf, and that's all fraudulent behavior, which goes at the expense of us as consumers, but also the institutions which use these type of applications. So one of the questions we often get is, why is it so easy to actually target these mobile apps? I mean, we used to have smart cards. We had MagStripe. MagStripe has been almost phased out in Europe for obvious security reasons. Also in the rest of the world, I think the US is also getting to that point, but it's still a little bit behind the game there. But we already see that these mobile apps, which are replacing a lot of the payment use cases, are equally attractive from a tech point of view if they are not secured properly. And the reason for that is that they are, they're on one side, they're freely available in the App Store, so anyone can download them, can start to analyze the application. There are a sufficient amount of tools available to analyze the app itself, understand what's going on inside the app, get access to the actual source code if it's not protected properly. There's a lot of sophisticated tools available which can also allow attackers to manipulate the applications, instrument them, change them, repackage them, and upload again to the Play Store. And these apps are also running on devices which we can't fully trust. There's such a wide variety of devices out there. Maybe not on the iPhone side, because that's probably a few dozen, if not more, but we're not talking about thousands. But on the Android side, we're literally talking about many thousands of different devices, device models, operating systems, different versions of these operating systems, different versions of the security patches, and different levels of security patches. And that makes it very difficult for owners or stakeholders of these mobile applications to get any form of assurance that their applications are essentially running on the device they trust, which is simply not the case. These devices should be considered as untrusted endpoints because you don't have any visibility nor control over these devices. And something which we also see on the developer side, on one side, these devices are so there's such a abundance of different devices with different characteristics, despite the standardization by Google, that it's very difficult for developers to test their application on all these devices. And most of the times, the developers also lack the expertise or the time to actually secure these applications. It's not a primary priority in getting these applications to the market in terms of what we have seen. So in essence, the applications really need to protect themselves. They can't rely on the platform to offer the protection needed for these financial applications.
All right. Let's put up a quick poll question to see what our audience thinks. While they do this, Andrew, I know you and I have chatted about this before as well, right? Just the state of payments and apps and their security. Any thoughts on things that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, Tim's comment about fragmentation in Android is really good. And where do you place your trust and where do the risks really lie? And, all of that. And this conversation is not about, look at all these risks. There's a bunch of things you need to worry about. This is more about there are solutions for some of these problems.
Okay.
And the challenge is often balanced with things like feature developers versus security engineers. And one of the things that we bring as a business is the expertise and trust, provided that we work together, that we can help solve this problem in a way that fits your universe, your world. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about in these next couple of slides is sort of the current state of the world and how we got here, as well as what are the good options that you can choose going forward. Because there's lots of them. There are many choices that you can make. And it's an interesting new world. We've all come through these last couple of years, not just in payments, and it's an interesting world that we're presented with right now. And there's a number of good choices that everyone can make. to make sure that you can move forward at speed in this market, because it's very dynamic. As Tim said, he's at FSISEC talking with FinServs and banks and payments in the United States. And yes, the United States is behind right now, but we're catching up, and there are answers, and that's what we're going to talk through.
All right, so let's look quickly at the poll results. So we asked, which security technology do you consider or find most suitable to protect mobile applications? 33% said trusted execution environment or secure element. Another 33% said Android or OEM provided security mechanisms like Knox, Keystore, etc. And the third is software application protections like obfuscation, runtime, and white box. So TEE, the Android or OEM provided security, and then software application protections in that order. So that's great to know.
I'm gratified to see that no one has picked option one, which is, we don't need that. So,
no, I know. So, Tim, I think that's some great feedback, and I know we're covering exactly that. So I'm really happy to see some of these responses here. So, why don't you kind of talk us through, what are some options out there, right? Like Andrew said, I think we all read a lot of stuff about, the threat landscape is changing. We need to worry about these actors and these risks. But if you're app dev and you're building new apps, what are some viable options available to you, and how do you think about these things?
Well, first thing, as what Andrew says, I'm happy that the awareness is already there, that we don't need to start why is app security actually necessary. So we passed that station. Now I think the main question is, how do you actually sufficiently secure your application? I mean, nothing is bulletproof. We should not have that ambition nor that thought that we can secure something that it cannot be broken. So for every use case, there's a balance between performance, the time and money you need to invest to secure it, as well as how secure it can become. And in practice, we have three main options for this, which are also listed in the poll. So you have the software means to protect your application. You have, in most of the smartphones nowadays, a trusted execution environment. So that's a second operating system which is offering certain isolation of memory, of execution, of peripherals and data from the main operating system, such as Android or iOS. And more smartphones are also being equipped with a secure element. A secure element being a smart card type chip for the core security functionality. Each option essentially has its benefits and drawbacks, which we will go into in a bit. So not all the smartphones, I think it's fair to say, have trusted execution environments or smartphones, but more and more are getting access to these devices. Or to these technologies, secure elements in the form of embedded secure elements. And what you are also seeing with the chipset vendors is that they're essentially integrating secure elements as part of the chipset, the main chip, the SoC, like Qualcomm is doing with the Snapdragons, and I think Samsung is doing it as well. They're all moving towards integrating these type of things into the chips. But as we said before, each of these technologies has its benefits and its drawbacks. Like these smart cards, these secure elements, those are highly tamper-resistant hardware-based solutions, and they offer a very high level of resistance against physical attacks and logical attacks. But the downside is that it does not protect any of the other peripherals in the device itself. So everything happening outside of that smart card, and the capabilities of the smart card itself are typically very limited, is essentially unprotected. Think of your biometric capabilities to authenticate yourself or identify yourself, fingerprint or Face ID. That has nothing to do with the smart card, with the secure element. So that's not protected. Secondly, the API, so the actual functionality it exposes, is typically quite limited. And as it is a very small chip, typically the performance is also quite limited. The same thing applies to a trusted execution environment. So when we talk about these different technologies, we often say that you have pure software protection on one side, you have secure element on the other side, and TEs are essentially in the middle. It's hardware-backed software security. So the TE is essentially just another piece of software in the form of an operating system, which is supported by the ARM technology trust zone, essentially, to switch between the secure environment and the non-secure environment. This makes it that it can be much more feature-rich than a secure element, while in theory also being more secure than a pure software-based solution. In theory, because a poor TE is as bad as a poor protected application, or because the TE itself is also dependent on how robust it is against software attackers. One benefit, and this is what we have seen in the payment space with TEs, is the use of separating or isolating the peripherals which are available. Think of the biometric capabilities, such as your fingerprint or the camera, but also the touch screen itself. Because these capabilities of isolating these peripherals from the Android environment or the iOS environment also make it that even if the rich execution environment in which your apps are running is compromised, these peripherals can't be accessed by an attacker. The downside of both these secure elements and these trust execution environments is that you do create a strong dependency on the OEM. These devices or these solutions are also not future-proof. We've seen in practice that there have been many examples of compromise of TEs in the recent past. Falling back to the example of Samsung, where the whole source code base of their TE was disclosed. That's essentially opening up the floodgate for a whole new set of vulnerabilities which will be published in the coming months, because many people now have direct access to the source codes which they didn't have before. So a TE is as secure as the quality of the code, and if that is these TEs, if you take into account that these TEs are quite large still in terms of code size, and no developer is perfect, we know for a fact that there are many essentially vulnerabilities inside the TEs just waiting to be discovered by attackers. And once they get control of the TE, all the protections provided to the Android environment or the applications it's supporting its protection are also void. So when we look at software protection, it's kind of the other way around. It does add significant security for the application without having any dependency on the smartphone OEM. So if you develop a solution which is protected by software means, you create it essentially for a very large set of devices on which your application will be supported. And that's a very big contrast when developing a solution which is secure element or trust execution environment based. Secondly, on the flexibility side, as you do not have any dependency on the smartphone OEM, you can secure and develop your application as you see fit. So from that perspective, depending on what type of encryption key or encryption you're using, what type of ciphers you're supporting, key lengths, etc., all these things are completely up to you as a developer, while with the other base solutions, you're still dependent on what the OEM is providing you. So it's a little bit of a trade-off in terms of flexibility, the devices you can support, and the functionality you can get from it, as well as the security you can get from it. But in practice, we see that it might not be as available as you might think. So TEs have been around for quite a while. They are provided in many of the smartphones nowadays. So if you look at the list on the right hand side, Google has its own chipset with their own TE, their own proprietary TE. Samsung in a similar case with the Exynos chipset, and Tigris has their TE. Qualcomm has its own chipsets. Huawei has its own chipsets, and the different Chinese vendors all have their own chipsets with their own operating systems. What this essentially shows is that there is a very significant fragmentation in the landscape for these TEs, and this is similarly the case for secure elements. And that fragmentation brings problems or impact solution developers, as you do not get direct access to these TEs as a solution developer. You need to make agreements with the smartphone vendor or the chipset vendor, which for most solution developers is by far out of their reach. So it's already a challenge for developers to get access to the TE to load their applications in. And even if they can do that, despite the standardization which has taken place of these interfaces which the TEEs provide by global platform, there are still a lot of TEEs which have their own proprietary APIs, and they do not support the global platform APIs in full, which also means for developers that they have to adapt their solution to the different platforms they can potentially load their applications on. So you're impacted in terms of the amount of devices you can support. Then you need to tailor your solution for every different platform. And third, if you are subject to any form of security certification, the fact that you base your solution on a secure element or a TE also impacts your certification process in terms of scope and the associated time and cost it takes. So this is when you develop a solution really inside the TE or secure element. It's a little bit different with the generic Android capabilities, which are provided by the Android platform, such as the hardware back key store or key attestation or safety net. These are commonly available, and the actual functionality or the APIs depend on the platform version. And they can be quite beneficial for developers. But I think it's good to take into consideration or to keep in mind that the robustness of these hardware-backed features is only as strong as the quality of the implementation by the smartphone vendor. So the smartphone vendor is actually implementing the TE, and it's conforming with the requirements from Android here in terms of functionality. So from a functional perspective, all these capabilities are the same. They're available for developers, but the security aspects will differ. And these TEs are not as, how do you say that? They are not scrutinized to the same level as many of the apps and software protection technologies are in the market, because it's quite an exercise to understand how secure a TE is from a security perspective. These things can be massive, many millions lines of code, and that's quite an undertaking to get any form of assurance how robust it is.
Tim, we have a question. Andrew, I know you have a comment. Go ahead, and then I'll ask the question that's been posted.
And Tim, as you're talking through this, one of the things, and again, I work with a lot of our prospects and customers, and one of their interests is both the balance of quick time to market, high security, and, well, let's just stop there. Quick time to market and high security. At least in terms of the path to market, what I'm hearing and what I believe to be true is that there's many steps. And for example, embracing TE, if the goal is coverage of as many models of phone globally for, say, your SoftPOS solution or something like that, you have to test each implementation, which creates a dramatically more complicated implementation, cost structure, and time to market. Now, obviously, as a software vendor, we feel like we've got great solutions in software, which narrows some of that down. But that is I didn't fully understand that until we've talked through about this in the past, of if in an ideal world, maybe there's one TE that everyone supports, that works perfectly and is easy to implement. But it doesn't seem like we're in that world, right? And also, at least on the Android generic, talking about things like, the built-in Google tools, they may be built for things like pilots or things like testing. But when we talk about massive global scale, not that Google couldn't do it, but again, you're constrained on their robustness in their implementation versus doing it yourself or implementing something designed just for that use case.
Yeah, in practice, I think it's still a good practice to layer your security. We go back to the model of the onion. You have different layers to implement your security. And some of the Android generic features can be beneficial there, but it's not your only solution. So in one of I think in the previous poll, we had the three categories. So the software protection, the TE, and the secure element, where you have a proprietary solution in there and the generic capabilities. In practice, we see that the promise, I think, of a TE is not met. So having a solution which is available to solution developers, application developers, that's simply not the case. Application developers cannot make use of this technology unless they make agreements with the different smartphone OEMs. In practice, this is almost not feasible for most developers. So if they go that route, they severely impact the amount of devices they can support. And this is definitely not an option for consumer devices, and even for merchant devices, this is a significant impact, which is essentially a big problem for solution developers in that space to go that route.
Mhm.
Tim, we have a question saying, what about virtual TEEs like Magic Cube?
Yeah. So I think the term virtual TE is more marketing than anything else. So Magic Cube has a solution, which is essentially a software-based solution, which is named the virtual TE, but it's not based on the definition as we see for an actual TE. So it's very different from the technology you see smartphone vendors implement, because there you have real hardware-backed capabilities in a chipset, which allow you to separate the different peripherals, the data, the processing, so the execution and the memory. That's not the case with Magic Cube. It's essentially a software-based solution. Otherwise, they wouldn't call it a virtual TE. And this essentially falls back to a pure software protection. So it can be a consideration for a developer to use. And I think in that sense, it's most important for application developers to determine what they find important in a partner to work with. On one side, it's of course the features which are provided by technology, but secondly, it's also the robustness, the flexibility, the service the solution provider offers. So a virtual TE is essentially one of the aspects in software protections.
Yeah, no, Tim, again, in just in the interest of time, right? I mean, look, we have all these questions, right? Like you're saying, right? Developers have to make these decisions as they build mobile apps. They are risks to consider, but like Andrew said, they are solutions to these problems, right? And I think one of the questions we get more than anything else is, you know, there are problems and there are definitely solutions, and where do we start? And for those of you who are on this journey, this is something we can absolutely help with, right? To actually embrace holistic mobile security, there is a maturity model that we've kind of built in working with a lot of customers who are embracing different types of mobile app security, right? So we kind of help them understand, depending on what you've invested in, the landscape you deal with, where you start, and how do you go about securing your holistic application, right? During development and during runtime. So if this is something of interest to you, and you'd like to understand what an ideal journey would look like in your case, please do reach out to us. We're happy to sit down, explain our maturity model, and give you maybe some custom advice around what makes sense, what has worked well for other customers, and kind of help you there. Um, so talking
Well,
about
actually,
solutions.
Krishna, let me say something on that. Is some of this is also, I take this down to kind of brass tacks. What will actually work and what will actually solve your problem? Because we're not building software just because we think we can build cool tools. We're building software for a purpose to either grow a business or enable a new market to be banked or enable a merchant to have more flexibility or lower costs. And one of the things that at Imperium we do is we already have, let's call them a couple of handfuls of customers and many interested parties that are on this journey from an idea to implemented and functioning in the market. And so one of the things we're trying to bring, talking with Tim today, talking with Krishna and myself, is what works and what will get you where you're trying to go. And so, yes, we have a number of different tools, and I think a couple that we might talk through would be really valuable because they're very cutting edge and kind of next generation thinking. But truly, let's have a conversation of where you are in that journey and perhaps where we can help, because it's a straightforward process, but there are many steps on the path, so to speak.
Yeah, if I may jump in there, we see, especially in the payment space, that many of the aspects there are regulated, either from domestic regulators. You have PCI and EMVCO on the payment methods and for merchants, and they essentially define what they expect from a security level from these applications. So they have their own sets of requirements, but the link with this maturity model is also that it doesn't work just meeting the requirement. You have to understand your solution. You have to know what you want to protect, what needs to be protected, and then how you can protect it. And there's different steps there. And doing this right will have a big impact essentially for you with respect to your time to market. If you do this wrong, your time to market will be longer. You will be stuck in the certification process with labs because they will have all sorts of findings on your design, on the protection of the payment assets, the security mechanisms. So doing this right is very important for solution developers to be able to go to market fast, get a solution which is secure enough, and also secure enough to optimally reduce the risk of fraud or reputational risks, and to get their solution certified in such a way that it takes least cost and time in doing so.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, did you have a comment? Sorry.
Well, and I see the comment asking for the slides. Of course, we'll deliver these at the end of the show. But yeah, we want to help you win the first time down the pipe, so to speak. A lot of effort, you build it, you secure it, and that waiting for remediation is really a moment in this journey with a fair amount of risk, because you might kind of get a couple minor comments and then you're able to move forward into pilot, and you might get a redesign. And to the extent that we can help our customers accelerate, or just this payment space in general, do it well the first time, that is our goal. And that's why we put together this sort of layered offering, as well as the guidance of, if we were partnering with you, how we would do it, and we would find a way to fit in with your design, because we have that sort of flexibility.
And this is also not new to us. We have already supported many developers in banking, in mobile wallets, with software applications, with PCI applications, and they have essentially built pure software-based or software-secured applications to a very high level of robustness, which will meet all these requirements, and they go to market in an optimal manner.
Yeah, and folks, just interest of time, right? And as you can see, as Andrew and Tim have been talking about, if you are in the space building mobile apps that are processing payments, right, there are several things to kind of think about, right? There is the regulatory landscape that you have to worry about. There is just the threat landscape, and also the markets you're trying to serve. But as we said, there are absolutely solutions, and there are some customer journeys that have been very successful, right? And to kind of help customers understand this, we're actually doing several roadshows in several locations talking about just this, right? Here are the problems that we see. Here are some fundamental solutions, and here's how you think about these things, and what you should think about, so that you can figure out in what order you want to take these on. And so if we are doing a roadshow in your city, please do take the time to come see us. We're absolutely happy to talk to you about what you're interested in and how we can help. Andrew, any last comments? Because I know we're almost at the top.
Yeah, I see here we're at the end. I don't know if we can go over or not, but one of the things that is a looming reality is, and Tim mentioned it very briefly, is the coming implementation of MPOC, right? And so if folks are on the journey of that's what we're aiming at, it's almost a reverse timeline of what do I have to do so that I can be at a full run when that's released. And we certainly have some expertise on that space. We certainly have the ability to have quality conversations, and we're really, really thankful that you're all able to join us today.
Yeah, there's one question. It says, can you please tell, is Imperium able to detect threats from a USB port, like USB pen drive? So we do have so we do have a solution that's able to detect those things. So if that's an area you're interested in, especially things around USB port and our detection, please do reach out to us at Imperium and ask that specific question. You can just fill in the contact form.
Or first dot last, it's imperium.com.
Yeah. Find me, Andrew, or Tim. But folks, we're 45 minutes in. Fortunately, we do not have a lot more time for questions, but thank you all for taking the time. And again, it's a broad and deep topic. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, connect with us on social, and we'll be happy to give you more answers and help. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.